Hello, hello, and welcome back to another episode of Reading RRYAL. I am Dr. Shay Parton, and this week we are going to be doing something a little bit different than usual. I love talking about all rural YA on here and still want it to be the primary focus of this show, but the other day I got to thinking about how, as a teacher, I would have loved to have known about trade books that were especially written for rural English teachers. Most of my professional development experiences revolved around test scores, reading them, improving them, etc. And I don't remember going to a single PD experience where the presenter specifically focused on teaching in rural schools, let alone teaching English in rural areas. I think that would have been mighty helpful to me. Even when we did talk about test scores, the fact that I was the only sophomore English teacher for the students who were going to be taking their end of course assessment, and which was their graduation exam, wasn't ever a consideration. Like, what do we do when there's only one teacher teaching all of these students as they prepare to take this test, and how do we think about what those scores say about that person as a teacher, So there's just a lot about professional development that doesn't think about place. And so I wanted to start talking about books that strive to do that strive to think about place and how to continue developing our practices as teachers, especially as English teachers in rural areas. So today, I am starting a new series where I'm going to do a deep dive on a trade book I wish I would have had when I was in my rural classroom. It's called Teaching English in Rural Communities Toward a Critical Rural English Pedagogy by Drs. Rob Petrone and Allison Weinoff Olson, who wrote the book after spending time working and teaching together at Montana State University. I'm going to begin this series the same way I would with the rural young adult books that I talk about, with a summary and reading of the first few pages. Then over the next 3 videos, I'm going to provide chapter breakdowns, discuss the aspects of each chapter that I feel like would be most helpful to rural English teachers, and give any critiques I have, and then post an interview with the authors. So get excited, because all of these are going to be great. So here's to trying something new, and I hope it's helpful to my fellow rural English teachers out there, as well as teacher educators who are going to be working with teacher educators, whether they end up in rural areas or not. Like I was talking about before, I know it's possible that some of y'all may be the only English teacher in your grade level. Some might be the only English teacher in the whole school, and that means you don't get much time to talk and or think about or reflect on your English instruction with other rural English teachers. So I'm hoping that these videos and talking about teaching English in rural communities can provide a needed and welcome way to do all of those things. And it would be wonderful if y'all engaged with one another in the comments of this video, or the Twitter feed whenever I tweet it out, or through my Literacy in Place Facebook group, Facebook page. I'm hoping that all of those spaces can be spaces where y'all can engage with one another and the ideas of this book to continue to grow in your practice as rural English teachers. So please feel free to sound off in the comments in all of those different places. Ask questions, talk about what's worked for you in your own teaching in this realm, all of those good things. Okay, so on to the summary. Teaching English in Rural Communities focuses on ways to invite rural students in ELA classrooms to engage in critical examinations of rurality with their rural places through rural literature and writing. It features chapters that both work to build the theory of critical rural English pedagogy, as well as chapters that offer insight and examples of how to incorporate that theory into practice. The praxis chapters, or those that give examples of putting theory into practice, are importantly co-written with teachers in classrooms who have implemented the strategies that they describe with students. So there are chapters with unit plans and example lessons and example readings that they've done with students, activities that they've done with students. So all of that is in this book, and it's wonderful. It's one of the biggest strengths of this text, I think, that the scholars who wrote the book also wrote alongside teachers who were doing the work in their classroom. So I'll talk a little bit more about each one of the chapters in next week's video. So stay tuned for that if you want to know a little bit more about what's in store if you decide to pick up this great book. Now, to give you all a sense of the writing, I'm going to read the first few pages of the first chapter where Petrone and Weinhoff-Olsen outline the major tenets of critical rural English pedagogy, which they call CREP, C-R-E-P. Okay, so here we go. Chapter 1 is called Moving Toward a Critical Rural English Pedagogy, and it was written by Rob Petrone and Allison Weinhoff-Olsen. Teaching English in Rural Communities is a much-needed book in English education given the field's scant attention to rural context, classrooms, and curricula. Moreover, the attention that has been given to rurality within the field mainly focuses on the research community and rarely has secondary English teachers as its intended audience. In other words, for English teachers in rural and remote contexts, little exists within the professional literature for them to read about the intersection of rurality and English curriculum and instruction. It's so true. Given this situation, our hope is that this book will function as a space whereby rural English teachers can see themselves and their experiences reflected back to them in scholarship written not only about them, but also for them. In addition, by including practicing English teachers in the writing of this book, several chapters are co-authored with rural English teachers. This book offers a from the ground up and accessible approach to insert, humanize, and recalibrate the place of rural teachers and context within English education. Thus, this book is meant to redress a lack of attention to rurality and join a mounting body of scholarship that recognizes the unique challenges English teachers face in rural and remote contexts. Teaching English in rural communities has the potential to become an especially important resource for rural English teachers given how rampant professional isolation is for many of these teachers. The isolation of rural and remote English teachers stems both from geography and what we refer to as the silo effect of small and/or single-person English departments in many rural schools. As a result, the reality is that rural English teachers often lack disciplinary colleagues and consequently content-specific pedagogical conversations, like I was talking about before. This book, by emphasizing concrete examples of classroom practice, provides some of this collegial dialogue in the form of ideas for rural English curricula practiced by rural English teachers in rural schools. In fact, the primary purpose of teaching English in rural communities is to help English teachers develop equity-oriented pedagogical practices that both address broad cultural discourses of rurality and respond to the local rural context in which they teach. It's important to note, too, that reading about and understanding rural context is essential for anyone invested in English education. As an English education colleague who focuses on urban education recently said to us, I and people who do what I do need to know about this too, and we agree. Understanding rurality is not just for people who work and live in rural contexts, particularly as urban-rural divides both potentially polarize, as evidenced by the 2016 presidential election, and promise to unite, as evidenced by many movements linking urban and rural people together to work toward common aims. Emphasizing rurality for people beyond rural communities is crucial too, since deficit-laden stereotypes and representations of rural people and places dominate popular culture and media. Given these troubling depictions, it becomes imperative that teachers provide a way for students who both do and do not live, experience, or understand rural to have tools to speak back to these diminished representations. In this way, we see the attention to and nuanced understandings of rural context for teaching and learning English as crucial threads to be stitched into the broader tapestry of helping bring about a more equitable educational system for all students across rural, suburban, and urban contexts. Furthermore, alongside the limited scholarship focused on rurality and English education, attention to rural context for learning and teaching English is vital, given the social justice concerns and issues of equity inherent in rural education. The social justice concerns include, among other issues, inadequate resources, poverty, shifting demographics, geographic isolation, school closures, lack of teacher support, and poor teacher retention. An emphasis on rurality is of particular importance in this current moment, given the fast rate at which demographics of rural communities are changing. something that, if not attended to, often has adverse effects for students, especially for those of whom English is not a first language. Moreover, though Black, Indigenous, and people of color, BIPOC, comprise approximately 20% of rural populations, rurality typically gets coded as white, which raises concerns about potential social erasure of rural BIPOC communities, not the least of which includes Indigenous populations, especially those residing on reservations. And they go on to talk about troubling those representations of rurality and how we can do that through our English curriculum in our classrooms. They talk about how CREP helps students confront stereotype threat, sort of the ingestion of the negative and deficit things that society says about rural people by rural people. They talk about challenging what outsiders say that rural is, as well as what insiders say rural is and what it actually looks like, and doing all of that through our English curriculum in order to help students continue to get to understand who they are, how they understand the world, and how the world understands them in really important ways. So, this is such an important book for rural and non-rural teachers alike. And if you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend that you do. It's really good. Like I said, I wish I would have had this when I was in the classroom. It would have been tremendously helpful to me. Well, that's it for this week's episode. Tune in next week for a chapter-by-chapter breakdown of the text. Until then, y'all come back now, would ya?